Started. Thank you everyone for joining us for the Leverage Your Buying Power session today. My name is Tanya Pierce. I'm the Marketing Director for ISG. We've assembled a team of ISG professionals today with a wide cross-section of geographic reach, technical expertise, market, and diversity. So with that, I think we should be able to provide a wonderful session today on some good, robust feedback that we have learned and seen. So the question is, why are we doing this?
Thanks, Tanya. There's been a lot that's happened to all of us in the last 3 months, and internally, a lot of dialogue, as I'm sure many of you that are listening in here have had. What's happening in the marketplace. How is it affecting things? More we've talked about it, and with some prompting from Chad within our office and others are like, well, we've got the fortunate opportunity of, not only living in our design world, but with our contracting partners and construction manager partners and owners, representatives, and vendors that we work with kind of across geographies and markets and everything. There's a lot of dialogue that we have the opportunity to have with those folks, and in learning the things we have, we wanted to get some information out there. I think a lot of our dialogue was centered around, this is all new enough. We're 3 months in. There's not a lot nationally, and our national media is focused on some other things. So there are questions we're asking, and why not share what we're finding, and hopefully people find the information useful. But there's a lot that's changed, and what we can share today is what we've learned over the last 3 months, do our best to provide our insight on how it might affect things in the future. But if that helps answer some questions or uncertainty, again, we're in a fortunate position to have a big cross-section of individuals that we're talking to, and as it relates to construction, what's happened, what do we think is going to happen in the future, and we're here today to share our thoughts, and hopefully people find it helpful.
So we have had several questions come in at the time of registration. I think in our presentation today, as we were preparing our notes and everything, most of what's been asked is wrapped into our presentation, but we will address those remaining items at the end. And certainly the presentation is recorded and will be sent out following as well for those that have to cut out early or are not able to join us. So with that, why don't we start out with the state of the state?
Okay. Well, like I said, the effects of the last 3 months have been pretty far-reaching for everyone. When we entered March and hit mid-March, when the stay-at-home orders went into effect for everyone, that's really when some of these changes took hold for everyone. We were fortunate with what we're doing to really just transition to a different location to our homes and continue about our work. But that's easier in our industry than a lot of other industries. So the first few weeks was a lot of just almost adapting by the hour for virtually every business, and coming up with contingency plans for whether it was keeping production going or people busy. It just had a lot of different effects. So for the projects we were working on in the first 2-3 weeks especially, there was a lot of projects put on hold or slowed down significantly, largely driven by availability of people, just while everyone was sorting through what was going on. I think that from a company perspective, we saw probably 10-15% of our projects that were just plain put on hold. And then coming out of the first 2-3 weeks, we've seen the majority of those projects come back online. And from a design perspective, we were working on those in one capacity or another. That's translated to virtually, most of the projects that had been put on hold have come back online. However, a lot of those that had been put on hold are on a different timeline. So the timeline's been pushed, and we're just, our schedule to get things done has been modified. So the big unknown coming out of this, and for many others then, is for the type of work we're doing and how our work leads to construction down the road. What are the projects that no one's hearing about right now because of what's happened, and will they surface again? I think as people get comfortable with what our new normal is, and we at least start returning to some sort of normalcy, I think we'll begin to find out. But there's still a lot of uncertainty, and again, why we wanted to have this discussion is, the projects we have, there's still projects coming in, they're moving, but it's kind of what are the unknowns that we don't know about right now.
Yep. And from a Iowa perspective, if you will, most of our projects have stayed on track. Most of them that were already in design have continued on, and that's K-12 market, that's on the municipal side, that's land development. So kind of the whole gamut. Most of those have remained on track. The one market I'd say that there's a lot of uncertainty around would be the childcare market. So they're going into COVID. There's a lot of talk, both on the private childcare facilities, but also whether that be related to a school project. That was a hot button issue. Obviously, when everyone gets sent home to work, that's had a major impact on childcare. And when that gets back to some sort of normality, not sure. So those projects that we had on the books have been put on indefinite hold, but for the most part, everything else has continued forward. The housing market in our region still is very strong, so people are still building houses, both on the multifamily side and the land development side. So overall, things are still relatively positive. There's still work out there. So, Brian, what are you seeing?
Yeah, no, I mean, probably, overall, from a couple other geographies, really the same thing that Brian and Tim were mentioning. Going into this initial shutdown, everything kind of started to slow down a little bit, understand what's going on, but then everything's kind of starting to pick back up. Saw some construction schedules being modified a little bit, accounting for some extra sanitation. Maybe don't get a productive day done every day. One example we saw kind of as a positive was a project that had many events scheduled throughout the year and throughout the life of the construction schedule. They were actually to capture on that construction schedule some additional time by rescheduling pieces and realigning to some of the renovation work within the facility versus just the new construction. So hopefully that overall has a good impact on the overall construction schedule, and they're actually able to improve and open sooner. And then when people are able to gather again, they're able to use those spaces and be in new spaces. But then also kind of finding new ways to keep construction moving or construction starting. Been doing more and more virtual construction meetings if it's FaceTime, finding ways to get with the contractor, resolve problems, keep construction moving. But they didn't even start construction, virtual pre-bid meetings, creating videos or walkthroughs or photos, using our plans and our 3D model along with some of our 3D visualization team to create models to share with the contractors to get them to fully understand the space.
And I think in industry that there's a lot of tradition in it. The changes have really forced everyone to rethink and accept alternative ways of doing those things. And even on the design side, there was just a lot of face-to-face interaction that was kind of a tradition of the industry that both us owners, contractors that we're working with, everyone's been really proactive in trying to adapt and leverage our technology to a degree that we never have, and keep designs going where traditional ways were not going to work. And I think it's been a positive for the industry.
Yeah, I think it's helped keep a positive mindset throughout the whole situation. So
Which segments of the market would you say have had the most dramatic impact, have been impacted the most dramatically?
Sure, I'll start with this one. So start with the obvious, hospitality. So specifically on the hotel side, we had a couple hotel projects ongoing into construction when COVID hit. Those projects are still moving forward. And speaking with that developer, he seems relatively optimistic still. He said that going into this, all of his hotels were averaging about 80% occupancy. The last 3 months, that's dipped down to about 20%. He's seen bookings starting next week back up to closer to 60%. So things are trending in the right direction. His optimism really stems from the fact that unlike 2008, this rebound is happening without a reduction in room rates. So even from 3 months ago, those room rates have stayed pretty steady, and the market's just recovering without that steep reduction. So he's pretty positive about what that looks like. Commercial retail is another one that's been hit. A lot of that stems from the financing industry. So banks for the last 3 months have really been focused on PPP loans. So deals aren't being closed, which is causing some delays. That's impacted us a little bit on a couple projects. And then moving forward, having talked to some bankers, they're probably going to start taking a little bit closer look on what they're lending for. So that's one to keep an eye on. I don't know, what are you guys seeing?
I think the food and industrial market, a lot of adjustments have been necessary in there. A lot of visibility in the media, especially on the food production side, with large facilities and concentrations of employees, and those companies needing to react and then implement safety programs, PPE measures for the facilities and all the employees to keep them safe. But also, after some of their initial reaction and shutdown in some cases and slowdowns in others, new procedures to get them back up and running again. But that has really also highlighted with the pandemic the dependence that the United States and the world, for that matter, has on the Midwest for food. I think that's a long-term positive when we're again looking out. How does this thing have an effect 6 months, a year, 2 years from now? There's that dependence doesn't go away. Some of the other things in the food industrial is there's a lot of specialty equipment for processing, automation. That equipment is manufactured, or components of it manufactured overseas prior to coming here. The supply chain disruptions with the borders being shut down has affected both orders and deliveries on some of that equipment. With the travel restrictions and the global reach and effect of the pandemic. So still things that are being sorted through from that end, but it has had an effect. There's also just a lot of specialty trades working in the food industrial marketplace that with some of the things, those plants got to keep operating. So the demand remains high for some of those specialty trades. So the reporting we're getting and talking to some of the vendors and contractors in that area, they remain busy. That, like everything else, the backlog there's still a bit of an unknown, but they remain busy right now, which I think it's a good sign to be able to see that the things keep moving there. So again, just not as dramatic of competition in that sector that we're hearing and seeing in some of the others. Shifting gears a little to education market. So both K through 12 and higher education, a lot of change with having to go to remote learning to complete the last school year. But we are seeing a lot of movement in those markets to capture kind of the slowdown or lack of students as an opportunity to catch up on some deferred maintenance work but also take a look at the long-term needs of these facilities and some planning steps being taken in K-12 and higher ed to utilize the time to take that look forward and plan for some upcoming projects. K-12 especially there's some uncertainty that we don't know what going back to school in the fall looks like yet. A lot of administrators and things are spending a lot of time with 3 to 4 plans potentially for what does going back to school look like. So a lot of focus on that right now. But that also means that we're looking at what's the increased level of flexibility in education look like, and it's leveraging technology more, and what does the infrastructure look like. So a lot of work being put into that right now, as well as flexible learning environments.
Yeah, I was going to jump in. What we've heard from educators is while this technology has been great for a lot of industries, it's really reinforced the need for especially the younger learners to be in that school environment.
Yes.
That's huge. You've heard that multiple times. Once you get kind of into the upper high school age, they can start to learn remote, but especially for the younger students, it's vital that they get back to some normality and back into a school setting. So
and really answering, in a back to school setting, if social distancing is required and continues to be required, what does that mean if if you've got a student body that is back to school in some form or another, and can the facilities accommodate, social distancing and the students needing to be spread out more?
And I think you learn a lot of soft skills being around people too. So it's benefit long term. But jumping over to public infrastructure, municipal water, wastewater, agriculture, we're actually seeing a little bit of uptick in work there. We're hearing a common theme from delays that were caused from weather, rain, and such in 2019 are carrying over into 2020, which is kind of limited some of the contractors to bid some of the work for 2020. So we're seeing most of it in ag drainage projects where there's a smaller pool of contractors. We're just seeing more people going after those types of projects, so more competitive with bidding. Power of the dollar right now is big. The bonding market, as interest rates near record lows, competition is high, unit prices are going down, and more and more contractors are looking for more work.
So the types of projects moving forward then are municipal, water, wastewater, and agricultural. Short answer.
We're also seeing an uptick in multifamily.
Oh yeah.
That's a strong market right now, and even on the banking side, they've said they've closed a lot of those deals here in the short term.
Continues to be the
And typically, it's a strong renters market when the economy is bad. So I hope that's not an indicator, but
yeah.
And then obviously healthcare is another one that really has taken a hit here in the last 3 months. I don't know if their projects have stopped, but with elective surgeries basically getting put on hold until things get back to normal, that's a major revenue stream for them. So
we have seen, to that point, healthcare has slowed down, but some of the niche healthcare markets, we have seen a little bit of an uptick in some of that work as well.
Brian, do you want to talk about the slide that's up right now?
Yeah, so the slide we've got up for everybody right now is the slide the graph on the left is taken from AEC Advisors, who are CEO Lynn Bruns, participates in a weekly webinar and survey. This is some recent results for them that are really largely reflective of what we're seeing in our market. This is representative of 280 plus AEC firms across the United States in all sizes and shapes, but really just reporting where the biggest changes are being seen, what projects are most delayed, which projects are least delayed. But in general, the infrastructure related projects are probably seeing the least effects. And, you know, commercial healthcare, oil and gas, obviously seeing pretty profound effects. I think the challenge right now and why we wanted to really advance this and talking to everybody here today is there's just not a lot of data out there yet because it's such a small subset. But still, we need to be talking about it and sharing with our peers and as this group to, you know, really get a sense of what's happening. I mean, nobody's got a crystal ball, so you know what information can we be sharing to help people make decisions and better guide them. I think the other influence is the graph on the right. Is again the bond market is very favorable. So again, on municipal and infrastructure related projects where bonding can be put in place, we're seeing very favorable bond rates. A client that I'm connected with and just talked to at the beginning of last week for a school project, they were able to accelerate the sale of the bonds for that project to capture near historic lows. His report to me was they sold within 0.06 points of a record low. So they're very excited. That translates to a very positive savings for the life of that bond for the district and making their dollars go farther for the constituents.
So now let's get into some of the actual costing trends. What construction cost trends are occurring today compared with what you've seen or what you saw 3 months ago?
I think the main thing is there's with all the uncertainty, the first focus is the short-term backlog. So what that's translating to and for the bidding environment, construction environment, is there's an aggressiveness in bidding that we haven't seen in years, and all the way back to 2008, 9, and 10. I mean the number of bidders, the aggressiveness of those bids, we're seeing at rates again we haven't seen in 10 plus years. That's all fueled with again the uncertainty that we've seen. There's enough industries that have had a profound effect in hospitality, retail, that there's very little going on, and the folks maybe that primarily operate in that arena are having to shift focus to win more work, and we're ending up with more folks pursuing less work in essence. So again, driven by a short-term look at backlog, and then building on that as we go. The uncertainty is just driving an aggressiveness in the marketplace right now that we haven't seen in a long time.
I'd use an example here too, Brian. There's two projects that I had out to bid at the same time. Estimates were put together by the same person, so same unit cost, and they're relatively same size projects. And one project in particular, we had a letter of financing from the bank. We included that in our bid documents. Bids came back. One of the bids only had 2 bidders and came back slightly under our engineer's estimate. Second bid with the letter of finance had 6 bidders and closer to 15% under our engineer's estimate. So contractors are chasing work, but they're also chasing it smartly. So they're not bidding everything, but when they go after something, they're being pretty aggressive.
Yeah, no, and just kind of building on that, more and more subcontractors are working. They're wanting to get involved maybe a little bit early on in the project to help with the budgeting side of things. And then also, there is a little bit of some additional cost with additional PPE that's having to happen while you're on site, and extra sanitation and things to that. But overall, still a lower cost. But then, Brian touched on a little earlier, is we are seeing maybe not directly related to construction costs, but lead times and increase of some equipment, likely due to manufacturer plants having to operate at a lower rate. So not a true effective cost at this point in time, but with some of those lengthened lead times, less people. But then, I mean, not only construction costs are low at this time, but overall soft costs, interest rates, carrying costs are lower than they ever been. So an overall project cost ends up being lower for the life of the project. Capturing some of those costs, not only bid day, but going forward.
Talked a little bit about this offline, but it's an opportunity for clients to possibly buy more than what they otherwise would have and use that budget differently. So maybe whether you're talking a wastewater treatment plant, maybe you pick the higher end option and reduce your overall life cycle cost right now and use this extra buying power to your advantage.
So let's look at the specifics then. Everybody's been waiting to see, like, what is the,
Well, like
what's the numbers?
like you touched on earlier, we're seeing the results. They're translating in our bids. We've taken a sampling of projects, largely in the last 2 months, because there was enough delays in that first month of shutdown that bids got delayed because there was even uncertainty in what was allowed for, especially in a public environment, what was allowed, defining with attorney, city attorneys and such on what was allowed for public bidding procedures. So again, a 3-month window isn't huge, but really some of the results that we're starting seeing really are compressed in the last 2 months, and we've taken a representative sample in a variety of markets and summarized here on what we're seeing for bid results. And as you can see, most projects, we're seeing between 4 and 9 bidders on, and achieve savings on those from what the estimates were, ranging from 5 to more than 20 to 30%. I mean, there's an outlier in there. There was a demolition project budgeted at $450,000 for a school that came in at $203,000 for the bid day amount. They were hungry for work, and I mean that was the plain and simple answer. Why did it end up at such a low number? You'll also see in there's a couple transportation projects, and to Ryan's point earlier on some of the residual of a very wet construction season in 2019 led to delays in those projects that bled into 2020. So when we're looking at some of the backlog, there's still some backlog from last year that they're burning through in that market that playing catch up. So maybe not quite as many bidders, but as that work continues to burn through, we still predict an aggressiveness in those markets as we move forward. So again, a pretty wide ranging and a variety of different project types. These are representative of all the geographies that we're working in here in the Midwest, in some form or another for the project types that are hitting on this chart, but a lot of savings on bid day that again just demonstrate that the buying power is there, the aggressiveness in the marketplace is there, and it's the savings are real.
And I would point out too the $26 million K-12 project. It's not like that these are estimating errors either, right? Because that project was bid off of 2 or 3 other recently bid schools at $250 a square foot. This is brand new construction coming in at 235. So it's not like, are these inflated estimates? No, these are reductions, and these are true reductions in construction costs.
And these are all projects where it's a variety of either they're an engineer's estimate or we've got a partner on the project as like a construction manager or design build project where it's a variety of a lot of people and vetting of the estimates prior to bid day. So we were very confident in the estimates going into bid day, regardless of how the bid results are going to turn out.
Some anomalies in there that we're seeing are people stretching their geography a little bit to put bids in. I think you talked about that.
That's I was going to touch on as well. We're getting more bidders, but those bidders are coming also from just outside, say city limits. They're coming from a much further reach than what we would typically see for some of these projects.
So let's talk now about the specific areas that contribute to the change in construction costs. What themes have you seen contribute to the change in construction costs that we're seeing?
Yeah, I think, again, I think we've touched on it a few times now, but labor's really been the biggest driver in the whole reduction of construction costs. People being contractors are pursuing more, reducing their overall rates of what they're bidding on, just because it is that much more competitive, and contractors are winning the work on much tighter margins. To go along with that, from a material side, though, we're not really seeing any sort of a change. A lot of that is remaining relatively flat, stable. At this point in time, I know we've touched on it earlier, some things have different lead times, that may change, but at this point in time, it's really come back down to the overall labor and the tighter margins in general.
On the trade subcontractor supplier end, again, just increased competition for the trade and subcontractors, again, going in aggressively with lower margins on the labor rates. But on the supplier side, still a fair amount of uncertainty there, just with the supply chain issues. Most of the markets have a stable supply chain for construction materials. There's some specialty things that we have seen some work in, but I think as an industry, it then requires a closer look at what those material availabilities are, and maybe some alternate choices, more flexibility in some of those choices to make sure that we can mitigate some of the risk with supply chain as we get continue to get these projects designed and out to bid. The unpredictable nature of the global effect of this and when the borders open up, and again, crystal ball not being real clear. I think it just requires a probably more discussions during the design and budgeting phases to really make sure those items are looked at with more scrutiny than probably they have in the past, just because some of the problems or potential problems we're seeing right now haven't been an issue in the past.
So are there one of the questions that came through, Brian, is for Brian or Tim as well, are there any items that have become longer in lead than normal that you've seen?
Sure. Well, Brian kind of alluded to this, but yes, specifically on the electrical side, I think, and like you said, the specialized equipment, but it's kind of our job as designers. We're also taking a stronger look at this and making sure, calling our suppliers, our vendors, to make sure that we're ahead of it, make sure that we're not speccing lights that are 18 months out. So yes, to answer your question, how it probably gets worse before it gets better, to be honest. But
includes more areas,
yep.
Possibly.
The other area too is some specialty equipment, whether it be process equipment or some automation equipment, controls equipment. One of the things in construction projects that were underway prior to this, where some of that equipment was already installed. One of the issues we're seeing again with some of those manufacturers being from overseas, and a lot of it actually out of Europe, getting those specialty trades on site to commission equipment, to get it started up, to prove it out prior to going online. there has been disruptions and delays from that end. And again, there's still an unpredictable nature to, when does that open up? I think once that does, obviously mitigates and gets things rolling again pretty rapidly. But it's also forcing the industry to really look at things a little differently. And, if traditionally a workforce was brought over from, Germany to install a piece of equipment, they're looking for, partners here to do it and still keep things moving and mitigate some of those potential issues.
Yeah, I mean, building off not only just from a commissioning side, we had a project that had multiple pieces of equipment that came from overseas. They were on site. They got there plenty ahead of time, but then it's, the piece of right now who comes to install it. Now we're looking at alternate avenues of people coming in to install that equipment that that's familiar with the equipment. So how does that coordination piece work? So working out just fine, but another logistic or hoop to work through.
What residual impacts on projects outside of costs are you seeing, or do you anticipate seeing?
I think one or a couple would be, changes in the K-12 delivery model. Brian and Tim both have kind of touched on these, but it may require some adaptation to technology, flexible learning spaces in schools. Do we create alternate spaces to provide adequate social distancing? How can we still get students, back into a school environment, learning some of those soft skills, for some of the younger folks in, say the K through 5th grade, we need those folks in the school to get better learning. But then also maybe see an opportunity for the AE construction industry to capitalize on some of the high employment rates, to pull in some of that labor back into our industry that we've lost over the last few years. May require higher ed to act more aggressively to train people or businesses to implement their own training programs or higher level than ever before to just train within.
Yeah, I think we'll also see probably a permanent change on the health check protocols. It started with some of the critical folks that had to work throughout the pandemic. You see it in a lot with our industrial partners with the infrared temperature scanning. There's been a lot of money spent on that equipment, and it's probably just at some point becomes best practice. We're seeing that some of the recommendations even for K-12 and into that market sector. So there's probably going to be permanent changes coming from this, probably for the better, and hopefully it not only helps with COVID-19 but the flu and all other illnesses. So.
And we even take a look at it from the design side. Just thinking of a lot of our industrial clients, we have 600 to 800 employees at work. There's 3 shift changes, typically all happening within a half hour. There's people coming in and out of the doors. So how do we accommodate a shift change for, say, 300 people going through 3 doors? Does that become staggered? Does our design become different, multiple entrances? So something that could completely change some of the way we think our design layouts as well.
Another area that there's just been a lot of dialogue, and I'm sure everyone's aware, but lean manufacturing techniques and just-in-time delivery, that brought a lot of efficiency into the manufacturing world. However, a wrinkle in the supply chain has also highlighted some deficiencies in it, and I think we're still in the infancy of really seeing and defining what effect it has long term in the marketplaces. But I think everybody's reasonably confident that we're going to see warehousing, cold storage, manufacturing take a different look, and it's probably going to require additional infrastructure be built, because a lot of this stuff was happening overseas with a dependence in China and other locations that people are revisiting, multiple supply chains, additional redundancy, just providing an added level of control to to the manufacturing process so that, you know, a disruption won't have as profound effect as, you know, we're seeing in some markets or some industries right now. The other one that had a very interesting conversation is even just call it the office environment, and a lot of discussions in, you know, large office settings on really re-examining what are the real needs for space in you know, large office buildings if the model's moving to more remote work. But even in environments like ours where the collaboration and everything is really a key component, and you know, being, you know, in the office together is really important. It's the design of those offices for cleanability, and you know, some of it's perception, some of it's real, but you know, how do you make people feel comfortable that the environments we're working in are safe and clean? So it's the surfaces and the design of the space, but also the HVAC systems that service the buildings. And you know, there's a lot of buildings with very antiquated systems that have no ability to control and filter air. And this pandemic has really highlighted that issue, and you know, HEPA filtration, other measures to, you know, disinfect, sanitize the airstream that, you know, we're sitting in and day out, you know, in our office environments.
How many K-12 facilities can we walk into that have no fresh air at all, you know, being introduced in their buildings? So there's definitely room for improvement on those. And you know, John Trickle, John Heggie can speak for days about all the stuff that should be getting done, and stuff we're incorporating into our projects.
Yeah, even in some of our landscape design or park design that we've done, what do those public spaces become looking like? You know, we always have one or two facilities scattered throughout a park. Do those go away? Do you have increased sanitation? Is there something with the light, something with the HVAC system that maybe wasn't necessarily incorporated before?
I think the last point I wanted to bring up in for this question is, this is one that's varying significantly by geography, but you know, the state of Minnesota just pushed out their requirements / guidelines for the COVID response plan required at every job site, and a lot of uncertainty with that right now, because what does that really mean? How enforceable is it? Who has, you know, how is it implemented? The reality is, you know, there's best practices that have already been adopted, of course, but with you know, mandated, dictated procedures, what that has for an effect, I don't think anyone has a real good sense of it and can really put a finger on it. You know, will it have an effect on construction? You know, because more time is needed to be spent coming in and out of a job site for health checks, and you know, social distancing with folks on job sites. You know, that can be pretty far reaching that I think we're just in the infancy of defining. But at the end of the day, if there's additional procedures, it might translate to higher overhead costs to maintain safety as defined by whoever on job sites. And I think the struggle right now is some of these requirements are varying. I mean, Minnesota's is different than Iowa, Wisconsin, South Dakota, other states. So are we going to see a uniformity in that? Who knows?
Yeah, or even when you're wrapping up a construction project in substantial completion, contractor's still finishing up. Does the owner move in? Does not move in? When can they move in equipment? So some things that I know a few construction projects I'm on right now that they're trying to work through and figure out how does that look, and how does the owner formally take over.
So now we get to look into the crystal ball. That's a little murky. I think you have one. You're hiding it in the closet. So what's your anticipation of how long this environment will continue? And of course, we all want to know what the research looks like, right?
What I was really hoping to tell us is as part of this program, everybody that participated got
It's a
the crystal ball that you ordered for all of us,
Right.
so that we could all move forward with a lot of clarity. But unfortunately, we haven't found that crystal ball yet. In all the discussions we've had collectively, and it's that group is much greater than who you're seeing in the presentation here. And we've spent a lot of time and effort, just asking questions, trying to, get a good sense of what's going on. The general consensus is, there's quite a bit of uncertainty still for the next 3 months. And in general, I'd say the consensus is, the rebound really starts to take shape in about 6 months. But again, I don't think there's any concrete data that anybody can really point to other than, a big cross section of people that have a lot of experience in the industry, just, and a lot of people who were through the last Great Recession in 2008, 9, and 10, and kind of fighting, clawing, getting through that, seeing what that rebound looked like. But again, probably one common theme is a general feeling that this rebound happens quicker than the previous recession. But not a tremendous amount of certainty on how far out it looks. I think I touched on it earlier. One thing that I think starts to put some peace of mind for people, individually, and then translating to business, is starting to see what returning to school looks like, and having a more definitive plan, has an effect on individuals with kids and sending them back to school and daycare, and really shaping what an office week looks like for people. If it's, well, am I staying home with the kids for remote learning to help with that and trying to balance a full-time job, or are they back in school? I do think the general consensus was we start getting some clarity on that, and it will help advance some things and get things moving a little bit quicker. But in the end, right now, the general feelings, it still is out of ways. And, to the point of why are we here today, why are we talking about this, there's a lot of advantage right now with what we're seeing for bid results and such, that if there's an opportunity, strike while the iron's hot to advance some projects and take advantage of the competitive bid environment that we're seeing.
Yeah, what we've heard from a lot of people is they've spent a lot of their capital expenditures for this year on PPE and labor and things that they just weren't expecting. Those projects didn't go away, so we think they come back. It's just, do they come back in 2020? Do they come back in 2021? Do we see increased spending in 2021 as a result? So is there going to be an influx into the market? We hope so. But yeah, things, and there's, like you said, Brian, this isn't 2008. Things are a lot different. People have more savings. There's a lot more cash in the market. The stock market's doing well. So a lot of the indicators are way different than they were in 2008, which makes it harder to predict what's going to happen.
I mean, some small positive things that you touched on earlier, just coach hours, they're not dropping, they're remaining the same. It was just a small piece of, okay, what do we do? Do we stay? Do we not?
So we've had a couple of good questions come in to this end. How long, with what the transition back looks like, or with what the research looks like, how long do we expect to see the aggressiveness in bidding continue? Like how do you kind of feel that could pan out in this 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years? I mean, some of that's sort of the trickle down, right?
We've talked about it, but I mean, right now is probably as good as it gets for buying power. We think there's going to be, especially as people start to budget for 2021, we're halfway through 2020. There's probably going to be an influx of new projects that were delayed. We know there's projects even on the K-12 side that are sitting idle, trying to figure out what happens. What does their new learning environment look like? So we hope that things start to get back to normal 2021.
Yeah. My take is that its aggressiveness remains for 6 months. Beyond that, it is difficult to predict. I think the caveat I'll throw into that is, again, and it's been a common theme when we're talking about supply chain concerns, supply chain issues for sure in some areas, but I think one of the trade-offs to capturing and taking advantage of the competitive bid environment is rethinking and probably retooling some of the project schedules to allow for some more flexibility in potential supply chain issues. And what it probably translates to is maybe extended project schedules so that there's more ability within an individual project schedule to be able to absorb potential supply chain issues with some materials or components for a project.
With that too, the other question that's coming up then is on project schedules. Are project schedules getting extended because of the tightness in some areas with supply chain? Your food and industrial is a great example. So now does that, or is it just squeeze everything else along the line, right?
Yeah, I think we really have examples of both sides of the project getting extended because either they can't find installers for specialty equipment or it's long lead times for electrical, so they're having to look at a little bit longer project schedule. But then other projects that I mentioned earlier of, okay, now there's nobody in the facility, how can we capture some of that time, put more workforce at it, get that piece done sooner?
So one of the projects that you saw on that list, we bid with an ad alternate to extend the construction date 6 months. Not a single contractor took that alternate. Most of them put no price to it and said, no, we're going to stick with the original completion date. Now, that's a project that has no specialty equipment. We might see some things maybe on the lighting side, but I think the owner would probably be flexible on those things and understand the situation.
Yeah, I would say the answer to that question is probably more market driven than anything. Because some are very much going to have more of an effect on supply chain and some of those things than others. So it's probably a market by market adjustment.
So as we look at how things get pushed down the line, when you look at projects moving, paused, shoved out to 2021, what's your anticipation or your speculation on construction costs come spring 2021? We're kind of kicking the can down the road, right? But at the same time,
kicking the can down the road, what's likely going to happen, and again, with people, the general consensus and feeling that when the rebound happens, it happens rapidly. And I think when that happens is it's going to be a large concentration of projects and people getting to get it done. So I think in very quick order, we're going to see some of the savings that we can achieve right now in the bidding environment. We're going to see those evaporate probably pretty quickly because we're going to have less need for an aggressive pricing model from a contractor, subcontractor standpoint. And then with a higher demand, some of those materials prices are going to reflect in higher demand as well. So again, I think we'll see.
So we're back to the original advice. Go now.
Go now.
Go fast and go now.
Definitely.
Yeah, because more and more contractors start to win the work at an aggressive rate. They're starting to fill their backlog and starting to feel more comfortable with the work that they have, that they can start feeling a little more normal again.
Right.
And we talked a little bit about research, what that looks like. I think Brian alluded to it some, but with the disruption in the supply chain, you start to see a lot more of the manufacturing that's done overseas, bring that back, and how does that impact things, and how quickly does that happen? I think are all things that are being talked about, but we don't have the answers to those.
Right. Any other closing comments that pretty much puts us at a wrap. I do want to thank everybody for joining us and thank these three for coming together for this. I think in all of our practicing and prepping, I failed to introduce you guys at the beginning. I don't know. We've practiced a lot. So Brian Jurdy is our Vice President of Project Delivery and comes to us with the civil engineering hat, as does Tim Verhane. And then our architect, brave enough to join us, Ryan Wauke on the end, architect and project manager. So thank you guys. I have put their contact information on the screen for anyone who would like to follow up with questions. Do appreciate your time and appreciate everyone for joining us. Watch your inboxes for a survey and a link to the recording of this presentation.
Thanks for joining, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Good job.
Thank you.